Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, estes nostra salve.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. After making the crossing to the other side of the sea, Jesus and his disciples came to Gennesaret and tied up there. As they were leaving the boat, people immediately recognized him. They scurried about surrounding country and began to bring in the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. Whatever village or town or countryside he entered, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that he might touch only the tassel of his, that they might touch only the tassel of his cloak. And as many as touched it were healed. The Gospel of the Lord. Jesus allowed people to touch him. And this continues today, that he would allow people to touch him. And when you think about our belief in the Eucharist, that we believe it's really the presence of Christ, can you imagine that Jesus allows you to touch him? In spite of where your hands have been, or your tongue, if you receive on the tongue, what your tongue has said, he allows us to touch him. And we need this, we need to have these senses of ours satisfied in order to experience not only God, but other people. In the book of Kings, you have an elaborate description of a ritual that is being conducted, or what we would call today liturgy, a ritualistic experience of God being present in a ritual. They sacrifice these animals, and they dedicate the temple to him. And a cloud comes down, and they see it's the presence of God, and so he is touching them and allowing them to touch, and it all happens in the liturgy. And that's what we do here every Mass. The liturgy becomes the experience where we have a sensate experience of God. One of the arguments I get from people about not having to go to Mass is that, yes, I can experience and touch God through nature. That is true. However, when God made man and put him on the earth, he gave man dominion over everything and said to man, use creation to glorify me. That's what he said, use creation to glorify me. And so the building of temples, the assembling of liturgies, the using of sacramental things is the way that man pulls together things so that he brings all of the world to glorify God, and even the animals. Saint Scholastica is the saint of the day, and she had an interesting experience of being, in a sense, touched by God through nature, where that can happen. But when we're experiencing nature in its raw form, maybe with the beautiful scenery at the top of a mountain you hike, it's a passive experience of God. You're appreciating what he did. And so Saint Scholastica is interceding for her brother that she can wake with him and his monastic friends, that they could spend more time in the evening, and he didn't want to. He wanted to leave. And so she prayed, and God sent a huge torrential rain, and it kept the monks from leaving the house where they were. So they had to stay there and talk with her some more. She got her way. And so the nature can serve us in a way, but when we take natural elements and use them to bring ourselves together to glorify God, that becomes what we call liturgy and the assembling of sacramentals. And the experience of touch then becomes so important with us. It's amazing the awe that I see on people's faces when they walk into this church, for example, and see the beauty. But on the other hand, the way also we touch each other becomes profoundly important because of baptism. We are all the body of Christ. And so we must respect each other as Christ in the way we touch each other, not to be violent or imposing. And I was recalling, as I was praying over the readings this morning, there was I had to deal with two people concerning a funeral within a week. Two wives, their husbands died. And one was in her 20s and one was in her 70s. And they happened to sit not far from each other in the church the Sunday after the funeral of their husbands. And without knowing each other, they reached across the aisle and shook hands at the sign of peace. Both of them told me in separate experiences, they didn't know each other, and I saw them at Mass, so I knew what happened. They both said, I sat next to another woman at the Mass, and she looked very hurt and sad. They both kind of said that, and I reached out to shake her hand at the sign of peace. And both of them spoke separately about having this profound experience of peace and caring when they were touched by that other person. Very interesting. Even something like the sign of peace in our liturgy can become profoundly important.
Regina Celi, letare